I firmly believe that there's a hand in what I'm doing, that it's a gift and a calling, and I don't just consider it a job or a way to make money, even though sometimes I do sound like I'm just a free market capitalist. But I do believe it's a vocation.
Welcome to Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens, a show for people who embrace the warm and cozy spirit of everyday living in the Midwest. From the blog Random Sweets, I'm your host, Stacie Mergenthal. Today's guest is Stacie Suedkamp, the owner, artist, and cookie engineer behind the South Dakota luxury cookie company Fig Tales. You'll hear all about the interesting jobs she's had, like selling mini donut machines and being a Catholic youth minister, and what she sold to help pay for college, to her time owning the Bean and Vine coffee shop in Flandreau, to finally starting her dream cookie business. She teaches and entertains during her cookie classes. She bakes cookies for special occasions like birthday parties, weddings, hockey tournaments, and funerals. Yeah, funerals. She fills corporate orders, and she's even made cookies for the Sanford International PGA Tour. And it wouldn't be Stacie without a sprinkling of her family and her faith. She shares expert sugar cookie making tips and a chocolate fudge bundt cake recipe from her 7th grade science teacher, Mrs. Chandler. So you can go get the recipe for Mrs. Chandler's chocolate fudge cake on randomsweets.com. You'll get links from what we're talking about today, get to see photos that Stacie shared with us. So for now, let's just go and chat with Stacie Suedkamp. Today we have Stacie Suedkamp with us, and we are not going to just talk about cookies, although that's your life mostly. But there's so much more that I want to share and learn about you, because we've known each other for quite a few years. But I know that you grew up in Pierre, South Dakota, but then you ended up in Minneapolis. And then next thing I know, you're in Flandreau, South Dakota, which is only 30 miles from me. And that's when we met in person.
Yes. So I grew up in Pierre. I've got 3 sisters. My mom and dad are still in Pierre. And Pierre was a great town to grow up in. But as most kids in the Midwest want to do, you got to get out and experience that big city life. So I took a job as a Catholic youth minister when I first moved to the Twin Cities and did that for a year. Worked for the Church of St. Gerard and had a very fun time trying to bring some lightheartedness to the Catholic kids up there. We replaced a youth minister that had been there for 20 years. And so the whole year was like, "You're not Denise and Dot." And I was like, "No, we're not." So that was a short-lived stint. And I have had all sorts of jobs. You name it, I've done it. And it's kind of led me to all of the skills that I needed to run the business that I run now. So for 8 years, I think it was 8 years, maybe it was 6, I sold innovative restaurant equipment. And people always go, "What do you mean by that?"
Right.
And what I mean by that is Little Orbit's mini donuts machines. So I sold mini donut machines for a great number of years in the Twin Cities. Worked as a customer service rep for a fabric supply company. I used to teach bead classes at Bobby Bead in Uptown. So I worked there for a while, convinced them that I should take over their website. And I was their website developer for a while, and then taught birthday parties and bead classes.
So like necklaces and bracelets and like that kind of
all
beading?
sorts. And if you look at me, I'm not wearing a single stitch of jewelry. And all of the other ladies and the one gentleman that worked there were adorned with all sorts of stuff. I had made rosaries to sell to help pay for my college tuition on a little known website back in 1994 called eBay. And I remember Pat Powers gave me the website address on a Rolodex card. So it had the 2 little notches on the outside. He was like, "You could sell these." So my whole family would watch these eBay auctions, and the rosaries that I would make would sell for like $70 to $100.
Wow.
Right? And I've always been a lifelong learner, and I'm always like, you can figure stuff out, right? You can always go online and figure stuff out. So I figured out how to import handmade check beads at a price more discounted than what you could buy them from like a regular bead store. And this was long before Bobby Bead. But I was importing like Czech beads to make rosaries and then would sell them.
To help pay for college.
To help pay for college, yeah. It was called, that was my first official business, which was called Little Flower Rosaries for St. Therese. I know. And then for a while I sold felt food on Etsy. So there was a trend where now you can buy felt food, but at the beginning it was Japanese art books that would teach you how to make felt food. So I bought a bunch of Japanese art books on the internet, and then sewed like little mini truffles and little mini cakes. For Christmas one year, my family doesn't buy Christmas gifts. You have to make Christmas gifts. So one year I made a box and I called it Visions of Sugar Plums is what it said on the outside of the box. And inside the box, it was like a key lime pie and a little cake and the set of truffles. And all of my sisters have them and my mom have them for their Christmas trees.
And they were all made out of felt.
They were all made out of felt and hand sewn.
And that was probably from the World Wide Web at the time.
From the World Wide Web, indeed. And then like my sisters and I did it, or my sister Denise and I, because we were always, my dad's owned his own business. We were always hustlers, right? Like my mom was a nurse. My dad had a government job. But we were always doing stuff. He owns this company that collects tree seed and wildflower seeds and sells it to nurseries. And so us kids were involved in that. One year we detailed cars for government auctions. So you would drive past our rental house and there would be like, because they were in between building custom homes. So there would be like 4 or 5 cars out there. And like, we didn't know any better. You just all got in my dad's pickup. Then we all went and grabbed a car, drove it back to the house, and then we would all detail whatever we were working on and then drive them back.
People would be like, let's drive by the Suedkamps today and see what they're up to.
Or like the fact that he collects tree seed. Like he's collected milkweed seed like for monarch butterflies for ages. Like somebody pays for that. And they sometimes pay hundreds of dollars per pound for that to be collected. So in college, when I went and didn't graduate, I would try to encourage people to come with me to pick a wetlands grass here called prairie cordgrass. So it grows in wet ditches, but they use it as part of prairie restorations. So you could go out, I could go out at 6:00 in the morning, pick prairie cordgrass before my first class, and I could make a couple $100 in a day. Well, other kids would come out and they would, because my dad didn't pay by the hour. That was ridiculous. He paid by the bucket. So the more buckets you pick, the more money you can make. And they would come out and they'd get like a bucket and a half. And I'd be like, you're not going to make any money with that. Like, you need to hustle. Like, you need to get after it. But you're standing in a wet or muddy ditch, clipping the tops of tree heads, like flower seeds off. It's not glamorous work, but it was good money if you were fast. So
there's a market for everything is what you're telling us.
I tell kids all the time that, especially kids that don't know what they're going to do, there's a million ways to make money. And part of have you ever done StrengthsFinder? Did you guys do StrengthsFinder when you were in corporate? So my top StrengthsFinder was ideation, which is not common. I don't know. That's what I was told, and that's what I like to believe. And my second one was belief. So faith has always been strong in that too. And so a big thing for me is like, if you can think of it, there's a way to make money here, or there's a way to monetize this, and not like in a gross capitalistic way, but in a way that like, that's how there used to be a cobbler that made shoes. Shoes weren't bought from a mall or Walmart or some place that had all of the goods, right? You went to the cobbler to get shoes. You went to like the butcher to get your meat. You went to the milkman to get your dairy. And now we just go to Walmart. We just go to Target. We just get everything at IKEA, right? And so it goes back to that whole notion of there's a way to get back to artisan craftsmanship where you can just make cookies, because that's all I make. I don't do cakes. I don't do macarons. I don't do all of the different desserts. I literally just sell sugar cookies. And then to boot, I only sell one kind of sugar cookie. I mean, that's pretty specialized when you think about a market.
Right.
So
after the bead stuff, what did you do?
after Bobby Bead, I had this notion that I needed to finish my college degree. So I searched for jobs that had tuition reimbursement. I ended up in a medical supply company, and a medical manufacturer. We actually produced blood glucose meters for the long-term care market. And I was there for 8 years because they had a great tuition reimbursement program. Still did not finish my college degree, um, but moved up from customer service, where I literally talked the elderly into how to change their batteries out on their blood glucose meters, to a corporate marketing position where I was in charge of their trade shows, events, event planning, and then their corporate communications. And then when that job ended, I worked for a Catholic insurance company because faith's always been important to me. Mm-hmm. And when the medical device company ended, I went and did volunteer training for a Catholic insurance company. So I would travel the 5-state area and I would teach 60, 70, and 80-year-olds how to qualify for our programs because we were like the Catholic version of Thrivent for Lutherans.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So... and that's actually how I ended up in Flandreau. So I was doing a training up in Millbank in Big Stone City. And what we would do is I would go to parishes and I literally would teach them, here's the programs that we offer for your members that are part of this fraternal insurance organization. If you hold these programs or you hold this type of event, here's what we give off in grants. And I happened to notice I by this time had started baking cookies, and I would look for like either little coffee shops or bakeries. I looked at Pond's Bakery in Watertown a while back, or prior to me moving to Flandreau, and it just was too much bakery for what I was looking for. So I was up in Millbank, saw that the coffee shop in Flandreau was for sale, thought I've never been to Flandreau. So I drove down in the rental car because it wasn't that far, and popped in, and it was a very nice little coffee shop. And I thought, this is a good space. It's a good space, and it was a good pace as far as like it wasn't super busy and it wasn't dead. Mm-hmm. And so I went back and kept thinking about it. And then what happened in so many people's lives where there was a big life change, and the big life change that happened in mine is my favorite boss in the world decided to retire. And when she retired, they made my colleague my boss. And I kid you not, this is what happened. Nate and I went out for lunch, and I have a big personality, as you know. And I said, Nate, have you thought about what it's going to be like to manage me? And he goes, well. And in that moment, Stacie, I knew this is not going to serve either one of us well. Like we worked really well as a team when we were equals, but him as my boss, it just wouldn't have worked. And by that time, I knew that I wanted to pursue baking, or at least try. And I was like, no, it's time. And then the Flandreau coffee shop kind of all came into place. And I think from my initial inquiry about the coffee shop to the time that I took it over in July, I want to say it was less than 65 days.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was fast.
Yeah, so you made that decision pretty quick, but you'd been baking cookies and decorating them? Like,
yes,
bringing them to people at work? And
I had started selling when I was up in the Twin Cities. So
okay.
I had a fair bit of business, but it was just a part-time job. So I've always had part-time jobs. So when I was at the medical device company, I worked as a receptionist at Walser Toyota, Bloomington. So 3 nights a week and every other Saturday, I would answer the phones and like scan driver's license because I'm single. I don't have any kids. So what was I going to do? Go home and watch Bravo TV all night long? Like, and I still had hobbies. I still quilted and did, knitting group and was part of a scooter group and the whole 9 yards. But there's a lot of time in a day. And so I had sold stuff to both friends, family, and had started to kind of make a name for myself up in the Twin Cities where friends of friends would call and have me do cookies. So it was a bit of a business already then. But I kept telling people when they were like, you should do this as a business.
Right.
I kept saying, if I was smart, I would do this at home. If I was smart, I would do this at home, because South Dakota has an amazing landscape for business. It's just so business friendly. And I have never been so grateful to be back home in South Dakota as I was watching all of my friends in Minnesota during the pandemic.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I was
Oh,
open
gosh.
for business. I was never closed for business.
Yep.
And friends of mine in the restaurant industry in Minnesota struggled so much. And
so
it
many
was devastating.
closed.
Yeah.
So
It
many
was
of them are
devastating.
gone.
And the
Yeah.
pivots that they were allowed to do versus what I could do in South Dakota, I mean, it would have shuttered my business.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I was going to ask you why, if you were in the cities already and you knew people and you were already starting your business, and that's how things start, friends, family, and then the friends of the friends, and eventually you don't know who the customers are, what it was about wanting to come back to South Dakota.
it was also horribly expensive. So I used to pay $25 an hour to bake from a commercial kitchen. And cookies like mine take hours to do. It's not the baking time, it's the decorating time. So even though I wasn't actively using the kitchen, I still had to be in a commercial space. At the time, it's different now, but at the time, I couldn't bake from home and sell what I did. The cottage food law has now since changed in Minnesota, so people are able to bake from their homes, and still there wasn't a cap. That wasn't the case. So I knew I needed to be in a commercial kitchen because I also shipped cookies all over the country. So I needed to be in a commercial space to still allow that shipping. And South Dakota's such a business friendly state that they made it really easy. I remember my first food inspection at the Flandreau coffee shop. I was terrified because they used a regular crock pot, an actual crock pot.
Oh.
And in Minnesota, that's not allowed. You have to use an NSF, temperature controlled, whatever. And this food inspector is like, I mean, check the temperature. As long as the temperature's fine, it's fine. And I was mortified. I was like, people are going to die in the extreme. But in Minneapolis, it was so rigid, and the rules and regulations to get certified and have everything that you need. I mean, just to step foot into the commercial kitchen required so much. And here it's open for business, right? And still there's licensing and everything to make sure that you're still good. But I mean, it's just a lot easier and a lot friendlier here than it was there. Plus, my parents are still in Pierre and they're getting older, so it's nice to be closer to home. And I kid you not, the first Sam's trip that I made for the coffee shop, I ran into a high school classmate of mine, and he was like, I heard you were moving back. Now, this is a guy that I had not talked to since 1994 when we graduated, and I didn't have a lot of friends in high school either. So the fact that he was excited and welcoming and friendly, I was like, okay, this is home. And I have met so many amazing people through this business that I would call close friends, even though I'm just their cookie baker. And I use the word just, and anyone who knows me or has been to a cookie class of mine, I don't allow people to use the word just. I'm like, no, you're not just a cookie baker. But true friendships, people that I can count on in all sorts of circumstances through this business. And I don't think that would have happened the same way in Minnesota. In Minnesota, they say people will invite you to dinner, but they won't tell you their address.
Okay, now
have
wait.
You heard this?
No, I have not heard this. And I live in Minnesota. And I gave you my address.
Give me your address. Thank you.
And I gave you directions that I don't know if were helpful.
But they say that people say, oh, you should come to dinner. You should come to dinner. And you're like, great, when? And they're like, we'd love to have you for dinner. And you're like, awesome.
And then they leave you hanging.
And then they're just leave you. And you're like, okay. And not to say that I didn't have a core group of friends and people that were super sad that I left. But the business that I have today, I don't think I would have been able to build the same way that I have been able to build here. So.
Sure. And I think even just talking about it like that, my guess is it's that way more just up around Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Sure.
Because down here in our very southwest corner, almost on the border, I mean, I can be in South Dakota in 4 minutes, I think.
It's you can walk there.
We're very much like South Dakota.
Sure.
I mean, we want to just be separate. We want to be South Dakota right here. They won't let us leave
I was
Minnesota.
going to say, will they let you annex?
We want to. Yeah, we really would like to do that. But all right, so you're in Flandreau. You've opened this coffee shop, and you don't know anybody there. I mean,
I literally knew one person, Bob Peasall, who's now a judge. I went to college with him, and this is what I heard. I have excellent hearing because I have 3 sisters, and I have a bit of a complex, so I assume that all the conversations are about me. I have main character energy, and I've had it my entire life. So I heard him say to the coffee clutch that he was part of, because I Facebook messaged him. I was like, hey, I'm looking at the coffee shop in Flandreau. What do you know about the Bean and Vine? And he messaged me back and said, I'm there twice a day. What do you want to know? Wow. And I was like, good enough for me.
Yep.
And so when I was there, I heard him say to the coffee group, I don't know if she used to party in college pretty hard. And I did. Probably why I didn't graduate. But Bob Peasall is the only person I knew. Now, as one does, like my family, and we talked about this is one of the reasons we talked for so long upstairs. I have an aunt that grew up in Flandreau, like through marriage, that I knew she was from Flandreau, but I'd kind of forgotten that she was from Flandreau, but no other connections. So people will often say to me, like, why Flandreau?
Yeah.
And I say the same thing all the time, because the coffee shop was for sale.
Yeah.
And the coffee shop was also for sale in Dells at the same time. And I went and looked at it, but that they had such a modge podge of like non-NSF equipment that I was like, this place is going to be shut down in like 2 weeks. There's no way an inspector is going to be like, sure, that's good.
Is it still there?
And then it is. It's 4th and Liddell. It's
That was
great.
years
They've been
ago.
amazing.
Okay.
They do amazing stuff. But like I went in with the knowledge that I had, right? And the kitchen that was set up at Bean and Vine was set up perfectly. It was a professional kitchen. It was amazing. I missed the air conditioner more, and there's an air conditioner over like the cooking area.
Perfect.
So like you could literally just cool the kitchen, and that's a luxury for anybody that's ever cooked a line. Like that's unheard of. So it was really top of the line and made all the difference. The problem is that staffing was always an issue. I do not have the personality to be a benevolent boss. I just assumed that everybody grew up like I did, working nonstop and just doing things because that's what needed to get done. And so I struggled a lot with that. And staffing is hard because the folks in Flandreau that are there working, if they have the means to drive to Brookings or Sioux Falls or Dell Rapids or Pipestone and make a better living wage, they do. And so it really affects the folks that are in Flandreau that stay in Flandreau for work. It's almost like it's a commuter community in the middle of like tons of people drive in and out of Sioux Falls every day from Flandreau. And so that made it tough as well. It's hard to find high school kids that can work at a coffee shop job because they're busy in sports. I mean, all of my friends growing up had a part-time job in high school.
Right.
And the number of kids that were able to work in Flandreau was small. So it makes it tough from a staffing side perspective.
And that was prior to COVID. I mean,
yeah, prior to COVID. I can't even imagine. I have said this to folks that are still in business. It's gotten significantly tighter. And like we already have a low unemployment rate here in South Dakota. So it's hard.
Yeah. So eventually you ran that business for a few years at the Bean and Vine, the coffee shop. But your passion and what you wanted to do was make glorious cookies.
Indeed.
And you were not being able to do that. And so at some point you said, this isn't what I want. I need to make a change. And so what'd you do?
So this is how I literally was running the coffee shop from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. At 5 p.m. we would close doors. Whoever I had on staff would clean. And then I would start making cookies. And I would sometimes make cookies until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then sometimes I would catch a cat nap on the couch in the Bean and Vine. Or I would head home, sleep, shower, come right back. And this wasn't sustainable. It was literally changing my personality. So when I'd signed a 3-year lease at 2 years and 6 months, I told the group that owned the space that I was in that I wasn't renewing the lease. And they were like, oh, we've got somebody that wants to move in. And which is the bank. It's now a bank. And it was such a relief, but also it was like, okay, now what? Like, now where do I go? So I knew I had 6 months. Like, the bank wasn't ready to move in right away. So I started looking for spaces, and I looked all over the area. Like, I reached out to small towns like Egan and their community center, like anywhere there was a community kitchen or a kitchen that maybe wasn't being utilized. So I was like exhausting all the options. I was looking at spaces in Sioux Falls. I was looking at Madison. I was looking at coffee shops, old restaurants. At one point I reached out to like a Legion that is on the edge of, like, it's been on the edge of being shuttered for all 8 years that I've lived in Flandreau. But they just couldn't see the vision. They were like, well, no, it's our space. Like, we wouldn't want to whatever. And I'm like, okay. Churches are hard because a commercial business out of a church threatens their nonprofit status sometimes.
Oh, sure.
So, like, there are cases where you can rent a kitchen, and there are cases where you can't rent a kitchen in a church. So there's all these rules and regulations. And really what it boils down to is I needed someplace that had a 3-compartment sink. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's the kicker generally for a commercial space versus a non-commercial space. And South Dakota does have a cottage food law. It has since changed since I've gone into my commercial space.
Made it easier now.
Yes,
Yep.
it made it significantly easier.
Yeah.
So here's what happened. I was at my wit's end, and I was like, okay, when I moved to Flandreau, I owned a coffee shop but was homeless because renting in Flandreau was difficult. And now I'm like, I live in Flandreau and I have no place for my business. So what happens now? And I went to the Flandreau Development Corporation meeting, and I went to those regularly just to keep, because when you're a business owner in a small town, it's nice to know what's going on.
Yeah.
And the very first day that the manager of the grocery store joined FDC was when I was there. And he was like, well, what do you need? And I said, a 3-compartment sink. And he goes, well, we have a 3-compartment sink in our break room.
Did he give you the address?
And I literally was like, well, good for you. And because that's what my personality was at the time. Like, great. Well, thanks so much for sharing that information, Mike. And I had one of the only active liquor license, off-sale liquor licenses in Flandreau at the time.
I forgot about that. You sold, you had legit liquor in the back.
Legit liquor, yes. But like, I was not a great liquor store owner because I don't really drink, which is ironic because I have a sister that works in the wine industry and lives in Napa, California. But that's just never been my cup of tea, probably because I had too much of it in college, according to Bob Peasall.
But it came with the business.
But it came with the business. Like, it was part of the business.
Yeah.
And it was one of the only active liquor license. One was tied up in a business that was shuttered downtown, and another one was tied up in a restaurant that was also seeking new ownership. So, and big dollar amounts. And there were plenty of people that were interested in that liquor license, but also didn't want to pay what it was worth. So Mike says, we have a 3-compartment sink in our break room. And again, I'm thinking la-ti-da.
Right, in the break room?
Yeah,
like
in the
what?
break room. So he goes, we should talk. And like, I knew him as the manager of the grocery store, but like, I didn't know him. And this is how things happen in a small town. He talked to the manager of Maynard's, like the president of Maynard's. And he was like, well, we'd build you a commercial kitchen if you'd be interested in selling us your liquor license. And I'm like, yes, I would. And so we sat down and worked out an agreement. And a lot of the Maynard stores have pharmacies in them, which are independently owned, but part of the grocery store. So they were used to having co-opted spaces.
Wow.
So they split the break room in half, much to the chagrin of some of their old staffers there, because my kitchen, their break room went from 18 feet wide and 16 feet long to 9 feet wide by 16 feet long, because that's the size of my kitchen.
And no sink.
And no sink in their break room, to a sink in my kitchen. So when I tell people I bake from the grocery store, they're thinking like, oh, like the bakery at Walmart where you can walk up and whatever. And no, I'm in the bowels of the grocery store. So I am behind where all of the stuff is. With no windows.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like a door you'd have to knock on in order to say,
there
are
is.
you here?
Because you've dropped stuff off there before. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
A really good almond bar. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. You brought me an almond tart. It was delicious. That's my almond. Like, almond croissants, almond pastries. That's my kryptonite.
All right.
Like a
That's
good
good for
almond
me to
paste.
know.
Yeah. So I'm don't even say I'm by appointment only, because there isn't, like, it's a grocery store. So I
Right.
deliver 95% of the cookies that I make. And most of my business is outside of Flandreau. It worked out beautifully. Mike and his team built me a kitchen that is perfectly sized for me. I always say that it is a 2-butt kitchen and I have a butt and a half. Mike Huther came up for an on the road segment once and he was like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Right, you're literally going to be standing right next to me because there's nowhere else to go in
You're
here."
like, you might want to keep the door open and stand in the
door was
doorway.
the door was open. And then you have to remember, like, my kitchen's part of an active, busy grocery store. So, like, there's forklifts moving around and people restocking things. And I think even my mom was surprised. Like, we know what we see as part of a grocery store, but there's also a whole backside of a grocery store that's stocking all of the things that go on your shelves. And that's where I am. I'm in the back area of the stocking part. And yeah.
Where can people find, is it figtails.com that people would actually go find you?
Yep. I always say fig like the fruit, Fig, and then tails like the story, Tales. And that comes from my scooter group. I used to ride around on a pink scooter group in the Twin Cities. And I had a black helmet that had 2 very blonde pigtails that were suction cupped onto either side because I was quite the spectacle. And my friend Robert used to refer to them as my figtails or my fake pigtails. But I've always been a storyteller at heart. So when I was looking at a bakery in Glenwood, Minnesota to purchase, I wanted to set up an LLC. So I was just ready to go if I wanted that to happen.
Sure.
And I said it, I was like, I'm just going to put it as figtails. And if I change it later to a DBA, I change it to a DBA, doing business as, later. And tons of people remembered that. Like the insurance agent that I talked to and the real estate agent. And they were like, "Are you the gal from Figtails?" And I was like, "Yeah," because clearly it's a nonsense group of words. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's like Google or Nike, right?
Yeah.
So Figtails stuck. And I'm like, you know what? There's something here and it has meaning to me. So when I hear other people that want to start businesses and they're like, "Oh, I should call it Stacie's Treats," I'm like, no, because someday you might want to sell that to somebody not with the best name in the world. So, like, as long as you have the story to tell behind the name, you can name a business whatever you want.
As long as the website's available.
Well, and like I tell people that all the time, right? Name checker.
Yeah.
It's because it's not just a website. It's also, is the Instagram handle available? Is the Twitter handle available? Is, all of the other things that go along with it. Because as you know from doing the podcast, yes, I bake magical cookies, but I also do all of my own marketing, all of my own sales, all of my own, which I always tell people I'm an amazing baker, but I'm a really terrible biller. People will sometimes remind me, like, "Don't forget to send me a bill." And part of that is because I have fun I have fun doing what I do. Health insurance is expensive.
And, well, yeah, of course. I mean, you have to pay yourself and you have to pay your space and all the ingredients, and those things aren't cheap. Plus your time.
Exactly.
I mean, the rest of the world doesn't go to work for free or for cheap.
True.
Right? So why should you?
Right. It's interesting. When I do classes, and I do a lot of cookie classes, especially this time of year, I give people my recipe and for both the cookies and the icing. And people are always shocked by that. And I learned from what I affectionately refer to as YouTube University. And right, someone bothered to put a website together to say, this is how you make royal icing. This is how you get this technique done or whatnot. And that's how I learned. I'm self-taught. I never took a class. I never went to a culinary institute, anything like that. So someone bothered to put that out for me at no expense. So I can share that, even though there's an expense, they're paying for the class, but it's not going to hurt me.
Right.
It also takes so much time and talent to put a cookie together, because they sets sometimes take hours. And it's interesting. My nephew, who, when he turned 4, I'd sent him Blippy cookies. And the first thing he did when he opened the box in California is he smelled it and he got all happy. And then he held up the cookie and he said, "Aunt Stacie, how long did this take you?" And it's all on video. And it brings me such a joy because he understands, because he sees me in the kitchen all the time, that this he wanted to know how long his cookie took.
Right.
In a long time. Blippy cookies took me like 8 minutes a piece. And an average cookie for me takes between 1.5 minutes and 2.5 minutes is all in for decorating time. So like I did a class a while ago and they were asking how long things took. And I said, it took me 90 minutes just to roll out the dough. Like that's not even cutting or baking. That's just rolling out slabs of dough. It took me 1.5 hours. Because when people hear how much cookies are, when you tell somebody that a dozen cookies is between $55 and $70 a dozen, that's a swallow. Like I'm like, gosh, what baked good would I pay $70 a dozen for? Right.
Right. Yeah.
A really good almond tart.
An almond tart.
But like there's an art element to that that's not just elevated ingredients, right? There's a piece to that takes time and talent. And I dated a guy for a while that was a diesel mechanic, and we were talking about cookies because he was big into Elvis, so I made him an Elvis cookie. And he was like, well, but the image was there. And I said, well, yeah, I use a projector. And he's like, oh, well, and like kind of blew it off.
Yeah.
And me being the delicate flower that I am, I was like, okay, well, do you like use a wrench or like a lug, whatever, to take lug nuts off? And he goes, well, yeah,
it's a tool.
And I literally go, like, what kind of diesel mechanic are you if you can't just take them off with your, like, right. I mean, right? It's a tool. So the tools get better and more expensive the longer you've been in business. I started, and I told you this earlier, I started with a KitchenAid mixer that I got in 1998 as a Christmas present. So a 4.5 quart KitchenAid mixer, workhorse. It was over 2 years before I bought a 6 quart, and I bought it at an auction for $90. And I thought, it either works and this is the best investment I've ever made, or it doesn't work, and I guess that's a $90 lesson at buying shit at auctions, right?
Did it work?
It did. Okay. It worked like a charm.
We're all waiting to hear.
And like and it was so funny because the 6 quart mixer compared to my 4.5 quart mixer looked so huge, and so it was like the professional grade, right? I bought it from a restaurant auction. I was so excited. And now I've got a 20 quart mixer, and when you put the 6 quart mixer next to that, the 20 quart mixer looks like a behemoth. And now I'm like, but I didn't start there. I mean, I didn't get the 20 quart mixer until I was well into my like 8th year of doing cookies. And like, then it was a new learning curve of how do you scale up a recipe that you've used forever? Because you don't just multiply by 8. It all has to do with percentage weights. And that's the other thing that people don't get either, is that, you know, when you're making 10 cookies and then you're making 100 cookies, you don't just times everything by 10. There's a different element to that as well. But you can start with a 4.5 quart mixer. You don't have to start by baking 100 cookies at a time. All of the tools have changed too. I now have a 3D printer, so I make my own cookie cutters. And my favorite part of all of this creativity is my art teacher asked me to do cookies for her late husband's memorial service. Oh. And they were big into crows and dogs. They never had any kids. And so I could not find a crow that wasn't creepy or like
Halloween.
Cartoony.
Oh, sure.
So it was like this weird mix of like, or they were like really weird illustrations that wouldn't have worked well to translate into a cookie. So I generated the crow image that I wanted in AI. So I used AI to make the crow image, traced around that in an AutoCAD to make the cookie cutter, and then printed it with my edible printer.
So you're a cookie engineer, actually. Yes. Okay,
yes,
good.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Start using that.
I mean, I worked in the engineering industry. They were using AutoCAD. Yep. They were talking about 3D printers. Don't tell me you're not an engineer.
I think part of it too is like, yeah, and you know that like when you're in business for yourself, you have to figure it out. Like when life presents you with challenges, I mean, you either have to figure it out or you have to figure out how to say no.
Or you don't do it. Correct. And that's what I tell Jason is I wanted to do this podcast so badly, but I couldn't hire somebody to do the stuff or train me or whatever. So the YouTube University is what helped. And my son Sajin and asking the people, it's either that or I wasn't going to do it. Right. And so when you want it bad enough, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I love it. It's one of those things too, where like I show people my first cookie, the cookie that actually my two colleagues, Chrissy and Kristen, were like, you should sell these. These are good. Like, that's like, and I show people the unicorn cookie that Kristen was like, these are amazing. And when I compare it to the cookies that I make now, I'm like, oh, Lord have mercy. Kristen saw something in me that I didn't see myself.
It's beautiful.
And so sometimes you need that. You need somebody that's going to go, I'd pay you $20 for that. And I look, my cookies are not significantly more expensive than the cookies that you get at Starbucks or Panera, right? As far as decorated cookies go. But you're willing to pay for $3.50 for a cookie at Starbucks because it's right there. It's ease of accessibility, right? But if you thought about it, that Starbucks cookie that's $3.75, that's over $45 a dozen.
Yeah.
But people don't think like that. There's a million, you're one Google away from learning something new and being a different person. And I've said that for years.
You have a lot of corporate orders. So now you're doing not just the 1-year birthday party that goes along with their theme, but you're doing logoed for large corporations in our area, which is beautiful that you've grown to that.
Yes, I am blessed. I just finished up the PGA Tour not that long ago.
You were
and I know
golfing?
This will come out in a couple of weeks. This is my 4th year. I had to go back and look. 4th year doing the PGA Tour, and the level of cookies just in 4 years that I did from the beginning to now, because of time, tools, and equipment have all upgraded. But that's such a blessing, and people recognize those cookies. They're like, wait, do you do the PGA Tour cookies? I do. So I've been truly blessed, and it's I consider it a blessing, and because we've had discussions about faith and whatnot. I firmly believe that there's a hand in what I'm doing, that it's a gift and a calling, and I don't just consider it a job or a way to make money, even though sometimes I do sound like I'm just a free market capitalist. But I do believe it's a vocation. One of the things that I do is I always ask my clients how I can pray for them. And that's sometimes weird, sometimes comes across as weird to people. And there's one corporate client that they know that I ask. So they always send me to like their religious guys. They're like, if you go, we know you ask. So go, Dave will tell you. And so like it's led to all sorts of interesting conversations from people in regards to faith. And sometimes people will say, I'm good. Like, and that you can tell that there's a shut, like, oh, I'm all good. Like, and whenever that happens, I always say, if you're good, then I'll say prayers of thanksgiving and gratitude.
Oh, that's nice.
It's because there's sometimes, and I think the first time I asked you how I could pray for you, like, there's a disconnect. Like, people are like, wait, what did you say? And
it's very unexpected.
It's incredibly unexpected, but I always tell people that question has changed my life. Like, and when I say that it's changed my life, it's changed my life in ways that I can name and ways that I cannot name. Because we all oftentimes will say, I'll keep you in my prayers, right? I'll thoughts and prayers. I'll keep you in my prayers.
Thoughts and prayers, yeah.
Right. And it's become such a blanket cast off statement, right? And it happened. I was delivering cookies to a friend in Brookings, and not a friend at the time. She was a client. And I handed her the cookies and I said, how can I pray for you? And she asked me earnestly to pray for her brother who was struggling at the time. And it was such a moment of like raw vulnerability. And I tell her this all the time. And I said to her, because now it's been years down the road, I'm like, I still pray for your brother every time I tell somebody the story of how this came to be. And she's like, oh, and he's doing so much better. He's doing so well. Every time I get a baby shower order, I like pray for that little one. And like the stories that have come from that, because people know that I pray, like it's that whole Benedictine notion of ora et labora, right? Prayer at work or prayer through work. And so I like, it's a gift. Like the cookies that I'm making for you, yes, are delicious and they look beautiful, but it's also a gift of time and an extension of myself to yours. And it's going to the most beautiful celebrations. It's a baby shower or a wedding shower or a baptism, or it's a funeral service. Like I've done more funeral services in the last 2 years. And like, what a gift to be asked to memorialize somebody in food, which is how so many people bond and relate and storytelling. of cookies of their favorite things. What an honor.
Yeah.
The first time I was asked to do a memorial service, I was like, oh, what? Oh, like, aren't they just going to have cake and ham sandwiches like they always do? Right?
Yeah. And
Cheesy
funeral potatoes.
Funeral potatoes. Yeah, like, wait a minute. But like, that's also, and I've noticed too, because of the flexibility of my schedule, I can attend the funerals of friends' parents that I've had to go to in the last couple of years. And people don't attend funerals the way that they used to. The luncheons are so much smaller. And it's just, and so to be asked to provide something where people walk in and go, oh, he loved the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, misguided, clearly, but no, just kidding. But like to be asked to say, here were his favorite things. Like, and that was the first memorial service that I did. It was the Philadelphia Eagles and Star Trek. But what a gift. And I've been asked to do it so many more times since then that are not like the people are not connected at all. And it's not like I advertise like, hey, memorial service cookies are 3 for $1 this week.
You're not dropping off business cards.
You know, exactly. At funerals. But like we celebrate people's lives so differently than we did where it was a bunch of a bunch of church ladies that made their,
scalloped potatoes and ham and
scalloped potatoes, and somebody made the pistachio cake and somebody made a poke cake and that's the chocolate whatever. And that's why I love your podcast too, because there's always stories that are tied to recipes that have big impact. And like, I know that my cookies, I have families and clients where I've done bridal shower, wedding, kid's first birthday, like, I'm coming up on 12 years now. So like at some point, because age does this to us, I will have a kid I've done their first birthday cookies and their graduation cookies, which is like shocking to me.
Yeah.
But also like, oh yeah, I guess I have been doing this for 12 years. Like that makes sense. So yeah, or 18 years or whatnot. But what an honor to be asked to celebrate. And like, I have clients that'll ask me when I deliver cookies to stay, like, oh, well, come have a plate with us or come whatever. I mean, how many people get to do that? And then when people are like, well, who are you? I never say, oh, I'm friends with Katie. I'll say, oh, I'm the cookie lady. I was just delivering, but it looked so good. Because I love the awkward.
And you wouldn't have gotten that in Minneapolis.
No.
Well, we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but we still have a few more things we want to talk about. I want to know if you'll share a few of your tips for home bakers.
Absolutely.
Plus, when you showed up today, you came with some little magic potion.
I did.
And I'm like, I have never thought or heard of this.
So I think this is really interesting. And I share this frequently in classes. I brought you my flavoring for my sugar cookies. And you were like, oh, and I said, I know it's in the almond emulsion container. So emulsion is just different than an extract. Yeah. Extract is alcohol-based and emulsion is water-based. The benefits is that it doesn't bake out at high heat. So you'll get a better retention of flavor. So I generally only use emulsions to flavor both my cookies and icing. And so I said, oh, it's a combination of like lemon, almond, and vanilla. And you were like, what? And which is so funny because I love when I can teach a baker something because, and Ashley Thompson on Kellerland Living, the same thing when she's like, wait, I didn't know that. It brings me so much joy because I tend to be a sciencey nerd. So there used to be a flavoring called cream bouquet that was commonly used in bakeries. And sometimes they'll call it like a wedding flavor. But it's a combination of lemon, vanilla, and almond. And you can mix that in different ratios for what works best for you. But I was explaining, it kind of goes along with all of the kind of taste profiles. So you've got bitter in the almond. You've got citrus or acid in the lemon. You've got kind of that unctuousness with vanilla or savory, and then sweet from the cookie and salt from the cookie is typically where that's going to be. So it kind of hits all of the flavor profiles in your mouth. I love mixing flavors. I think sometimes we think, well, I can only do one flavor. It's gonna be a vanilla and a chocolate chip cookie. But we all know that if you add just a pinch of mocha of coffee, it elevates all of those flavors, right? You can play around with all sorts of different flavors. So you could add vanilla to a lemon cookie, or you could add a little bit of almond to a lemon cookie, right? And mix and match.
Or orange. My mom would put orange in chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, sure.
Orange and chocolate. I mean,
Yeah.
duh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's, and like, what's the worst thing that happens, right? It tastes like garbage, so you give it to the neighbor that you don't like. Right? And they think, oh, that's so nice. Stacie brought me cookies, right? I used to have a friend that used to say, I made you cookies because you don't deserve cake, which I always used to think was so funny. And now I'm like, well, we flipped the script on that.
I like cookies better than cake anyway.
Exactly. One of the things that I do, I know when people roll out cookies or sugar cookies, particularly, flour gets everywhere. I don't use any flour when I roll out my dough. And sometimes people are like, what the heck?
Right.
So I roll it out in between freezer paper. So buy freezer paper. I cut it to twice the length of my cookie sheet. So whatever your cookie sheet is, cut it twice the length, roll the cookie dough out in between the layers, like fold it over like a file folder so that the cookie dough is in between the two like waxy parts of the freezer paper. And then you don't have to add extra flour. It'll keep your cookie more tender than if you keep adding flour into it. The other trick that I tell people, especially in the cookie classes, is that prior to making your dough, clean out a space in your fridge or freezer that's the same size as your cookie sheet. So once you roll your dough out in that size of the cookie sheet, you'll have some place to put it for it to chill. And then I roll the dough out warm. After I immediately make it, I roll the dough out, then I chill it. So I chill it in a flat slab. And people are sometimes surprised by that. And I'm like, because you think, oh, I have to chill the cookie dough, then roll it out. Well, who wants to beat on a hard lump of dough to try and get it back into that shape? So if Dory Greenspan, the queen of all bakers and cookies, can say that you can roll out cookie dough prior to chilling it, then all the rest of us can too. So
that way when you're cutting it with your cookie cutters, it's already rolled out flat and it's cold, which then it's a lot easier to transfer it than to your
1000%
cookie sheets. Yeah.
The other thing too is that people generally cut out sugar cookies. People are like, oh, this takes so much time, so I'm going to make a bunch of them and be done. So they roll them out really thin and then they overcrowd the pan. And that's when cookies start to lose their shape. So I always tell people, roll them thick. And I only bake 6 to 8 cookies on a cookie sheet, which is not a lot, but they'll keep their shape better. Because as you crowd the pan, what happens is it drops the temperature of the oven, or it drops the temperature on the cookie sheet. And that's that extra time where the temperature is low is when your dough starts to spread
out.
Yeah.
What about ingredients? So I know around where we're at, which in the Midwest, I mean, Sioux Falls is a big hub city where people go, but you have a favorite place down there.
I do.
And now it's outside of Sioux Falls, but for those of us who have grown up around here, we're very familiar with this place.
I'm a huge fan of Queen City Bakery. They do things so well. And like and they're very specialized. Mitch and Christine will often send cookie business my way because they know how finicky sugar cookies are. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement, but it's not an official arrangement. And I am happy to recommend other bakers if I'm not available for something. But Queen City Bakery is one of my favorites because they do what they do incredibly well. And also Mitchell is as sarcastic as I am. So that makes it super fun to go in there and give as much as I get.
If anybody can ever get me the recipe for their chocolate chip cookies,
ooh,
they are the best chocolate chip cookies I have ever eaten. It's the texture. I mean, the flavor is amazing. Yeah. So yeah, the flavor is there, but the texture is just, it's the crunchy on the outside, but the super soft in the middle, and it's just incredible.
You want to know what recipe I covet? Maybe this would be like what recipe do you covet?
Yeah.
I have thought about getting a job at the co-op in Sioux Falls just to get their date bar recipe. Have you had their date bars?
No.
First of all, you're going to have to take out a second mortgage because they're like $4.75. But they are amazing. And I will sometimes pull people into the co-op. Like if we're out driving around, I'm like, pull into the co-op and I'll run in, get a date bar and then a kombucha because healthy, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, dates are
and
healthy.
People
Come
are
on.
like, oh. And so Alex Hallbach ordered cookies for me. And he's a board member of the co-op. And I was like, I will give you a significant discount on these cookies if you give me that recipe. And he was like, tons of people ask for that. I was like, because they're amazing. And then he like promptly forgot about me. And so I was at the Startup Sioux Falls one day and I ran into the director of the co-op who was hanging out there while his kids were playing Pokemon Go downtown, which I was like, I admire that because I play Ingress, which is a stupid game, but also like out and about. And I was like, wait, did you say you're the director of the co-op? And he was like, yeah. I was like, what do I need to do to get the date bar recipe? Like, do I join the board or do I just
get a job in the bakery
or
there? And then...
how exactly does this work? And he says the same thing. Tons of people ask for that recipe. And then he says this, it's like an old recipe from the Food Network. So then what does my research brain go down to? I go and delve into the dark archives of the Food Network going, okay, if the co-op opened at this point in Sioux Falls history, this would have been around the time that this show was on. Like, was it a Sarah Moulton recipe? Was it like whatever? I have looked at all of them. None of them appear to be what the recipe was.
Really?
So I'm like, did he misspeak? Did he mean Food Network? Did he mean something else? But no, that's a recipe that if I had, and like I am a sucker for recipes that are hard to get. My seventh grade science teacher used to donate a bundt cake to an auction in Pierre every year, like Mrs. Chandler's chocolate fudge bundt cake. And so I reached out to her one year because I always send my mom flowers on my birthday. And Joe Chandler used to work at the flower shop after she was retired teacher.
Oh, okay.
And so she answers, and I was like, Joe Chandler. I was like, and I didn't say Joe Chandler. I said, Mrs. Chandler. And she's like, yeah. And we got to talking, and I said, if you ever wanted to share that recipe with me, I would take it in a heartbeat. So she goes, well, I'm working until 4:30 today, but if you call me back, right? The way that little old ladies do, little teachers do. So she sends me, I get the recipe. I send it to my entire family. I go to make it because this is like coveted. Yeah. I'm like, this is like cement. Like something is not. Joe, did you skip some ingredients here just to be like, it's close? I will tell you that the recipes that I share are my actual recipes. Like there's no like shady whatever. Right. And so I called her back and she's like, I feel so bad. I forgot like 4 things. Oh, and no. I'm like, yeah, like significant. And she goes, imagine this. She goes, it's because we were talking so much that I just got distracted. So she gives me the real recipe, which it's an amazing recipe. I'll send it to you.
I'll share it. Okay.
But it used to be like that was the cake that you wanted to get at this cake fundraiser, right? Oh. In my family, we don't exchange gifts anymore. Like, if you want to give something, you have to make it. And so one year I sent a message out to all of my sisters. Well, I know what year it was. It was my 33rd birthday. I was like, for my birthday, I just want somebody to get Mrs. Howard's frosting. So Mrs. Howard was the lady in Pierre that made all of our cakes growing up when we were kids. Okay. And I was like, I just want Mrs. Howard's frosting recipe. And so my sister Denise called Mrs. Howard and she shared her frosting recipe. I know. Wow. And there was something so magical about standing in my kitchen as a 33-year-old, spreading Mrs. Howard's frosting on the only thing that I had, which was a graham cracker. Oh. And it took me right back to being a little kid. Like it was one of those moments where you're like, I haven't had this in decades, and yet I feel like this is the best birthday ever. You want to know what her trick was? I'll tell her one trick. I won't tell the recipe. But she added salt, and she used popcorn salt because popcorn salt is a finer granule than regular table salt. Oh. So it dissolves quicker and dissipates better in a buttercream.
Well, that's a good tip.
I know.
When I said places, I actually was trying to go to where you buy some ingredients.
Oh, funny. So not places that I want to buy actual foods. All right.
That's okay, though. But so I was talking about Ideal. I
Oh,
think.
sure. So I love supporting local businesses because I am a local business. So one of my favorite places to get tools and ingredients and kind of stay up on what's trendy, Ideal Tent and Rentals down in T. Wednesdays, they have 10% off. So if you go on Wednesdays, it's 10% off. They're baking supplies. I don't know that they'll rent you a tent for 10% off on a Wednesday, but you could definitely go. And they've got a whole array of food colorings, pans, tools. They've got like Ateco tips and Fox Run baking sheets and everything that you could possibly need. Up in the Brookings area, it's going to be Carrot Seed Kitchen. They've got great stuff. I have 1,000 cookie cutters plus. Now I have the 3D printer, and I still find myself looking at like the cookie cutter like carousel because I'm like, maybe I don't have that one.
Right.
In Chamberlain, it's Berry and Basil. In Pierre, there's a place just called the Kitchen Store because we just like to keep it very, very what it is.
No confusion.
And I'm always shocked at when you go in, they've also been good purveyors of what's local to them. So if you love local ingredients, local honey, or you want to use an ingredient that's kind of extra, if you want to get saffron that maybe hasn't sat on a shelf forever, like those are the folks that can help you get it. And they appreciate the business so much. Right. So happy to kind of support that. And that's always fun too, because as you know, when you go into those stores, you're not just buying a piece of equipment from somebody who's selling a piece of equipment, right? Mm-hmm. Someone loves cooking and baking that's behind those kinds of stores. Right. And that translates into the type of equipment they carry or the type of pans that they use. Like you and I are both big fans of Nordic ware. I love my Nordic ware pans because they're good quality and I know that I'm going to get a good bake from that. It's the same with anybody that has a local business. Usually they're passionate about what they're bringing in. It's not just going to a Walmart or a Target and picking something off a shelf because it was a good price point.
What's your favorite thing about what you're doing?
My favorite thing is that I have time to do things like this. Like we literally have hung out all day, right?
Yeah,
like,
we did.
What a gift that is. And I always say that baked goods are, as much as it's a gift of ingredients, it's a gift of time. You can't do bread in 15 minutes, right? Bread takes time. I can't do cookies in 15 minutes unless I already have dough baked and icing done. So you're giving a gift of time. I have the luxury to go meet my mom and dad in Sioux Falls when they have doctor's appointments and have lunch. Like I got to take my dad to Minerva's for the first time. And he was like, this is too fancy for me. And I was like, it's not anymore. Like it's not what it was in the 80s where you needed to be in a suit and doing a business deal. Like we can sit here, you're going to be just fine. That's been such a treat for me to be close to home. I have gotten to bake for classmates. This weekend I'm baking for a classmate's son's wedding, which is just phenomenal. Yeah. And he sent me a message yesterday. He goes, I'm so excited to try one of your cookies. Like I've watched you for years now. And I'm like, oh, like what a gift that is for me to be able to bake for him, but also for him to have somebody that he knows bake for his son. Yeah. Right? Like, yeah. So that I've loved that the most. And also I don't have to get up and be to work by 8:00.
I was going to say earlier when you were talking about the coffee shop, I was just going to note that you're not a morning person.
No, never have been. No. Never have been.
When we're like, let's do a podcast. And I was like, okay, she doesn't like to do early mornings. And I'm pretty dead by 5:00.
Oh, no.
So where can we meet in the middle? So I'm like, 1:30.
Oh, 1:30. I was like, yes, perfect. Because I'm not a morning person.
Plus, you had to drive here, so
I have never been a morning person. My mom also isn't a morning person, and so like from the standpoint of success, you get told your whole life long, if you want to be successful, the early bird gets the worm. Every CEO's regimen routine is go to bed early, wake up early, and you think. What a detriment to all of us artists and creatives that don't sleep. Like you think about artists and creatives, poets and painters and whatnot that are up all hours of the night. Yeah. Think of if we just said to them, well, you have to wake up early to be successful.
Right.
You miss out on all of that.
We're going to wrap it up. What's next for you?
I'm going to keep doing what I do. I went and talked to the CTE Kids, which is the Career and Technical Education Academy in Sioux Falls. And one of the girls was like, so what are you going to do? Are you going to franchise? Are you going to have multiple locations? Are you going to hire blah, blah, blah? And I was like, no, I'm going to bake and pay my bills and travel. Mm-hmm. And she was disappointed. She looked at me like, and I was like, oh, honey, when you get to be my age, like you'll appreciate the ability to set a goal for yourself that's modest and attainable and also gives you peace. Mm-hmm. And so I always say, and you know this, I love being steady. I don't like being busy. So steady is kind of where I thrive. Busy isn't good for anybody, right? Like I don't want to be busy. I want to be steady. I have been loving doing cookie classes. So there's going to be more of those on the books. Several of the venues that I've done classes in have told me that I'm funnier than the comedians that they come in. So the classes, as you well know, because you and your darling niece and sister came and like they are a bit of a comedy show and a bit of a self
They're so
confidence retreat, maybe you'd call it workshop. But like I love that. I love seeing other people be able to learn skills to make beautiful cookies. And if I get to tell a couple stories along the way and a couple of jokes, it's all the better for me. So it's been fun. There'll be more of that, but I'm going to keep baking. There's a window to what I do. Like the mixing bowl is heavy and the dough is heavy, and you start to think, and not that I'm old, but I'm also not young either. And baking is a young person's game. So you kind of have to think too, like what's next long term. So there's a couple other projects, always creative. And again, from somebody who sold rosaries and now schleps cookies, like there'll be some other iteration down the road or some other opportunity, or I'm one Google away of doing something else. So.
Right. You mentioned Kelloland, but you're usually on Kelloland Living once a month.
Yeah, so Kelloland, I have, if you're looking for social media, most of my stuff is posted to Instagram, then Facebook. I have a mailing list that I hit intermittently, and there's also stuff on TikTok. So if you're a night owl, or you're, a lot of times I used to post specifically to, I would call them my midnight mamas, because that's who's mostly awake in the middle of the night. That's not a creative, or that's not, whatnot. I will sometimes decorate live on TikTok, but it's never like during the day. And so somebody else was like, wait, what? And I'm like, it's a random group of insomniacs that will watch like me decorate. And I'm like, I'll have anywhere between 30 and like 200, 250 people watching at a time. So it's not like a huge draw, but yeah.
What's your social media handles?
It's always under Figtails. So Figtales. So Instagram is @Figtails. Facebook is @Figtails. Same with TikTok. I think I've nailed that just about everywhere. Okay. There's also if you look up Figtail, there's a dog named Fig so if you just do a general search and you're like, what's this? And then there's a company in Italy that has a fig farm that has started using Figtails, that they reached out to me on Instagram and were like, how did you come to use this name? And I was like, well, I've had it since 2012, so back off,
right,
Claudio. But yeah, so it's all out there. I'm a pretty open book, so you'll find everything from like exercise stuff to dating stories. When I went to CookieCon back in 2017, I was not known for my cookie prowess, but people are like, are you the girl with the dating stories? And I was like, oh Lord, like am I not amongst my peers? Can I not be recognized for something cool? And they were like, no, the stories are hilarious. So yeah.
Stacie, thank you. The recipe that you're going to share is, again, chocolate.
It's a chocolate fudge bundt cake. Everybody remembers Mrs. Chandler. She had us do a diagram of a cell. So like when I think of mitochondria, I think of Joe Chandler. Like it was like a big deal because it was like art and science all together. So
well,
thank you so much, Stacie.
Back off, Claudio. Stacie is so funny. Be sure to check her out on her social media and then watch her Kelloland Living segments. She's hilarious. And definitely take one of her cookie classes if you're in the area if you can. And speaking of Kelloland Living, Stacie is the reason that I get invited to do segments on that show. because she's the person who connected me to Ashley and Brittany to begin with. So that is just the kind of person that Stacie is. Mrs. Chandler's chocolate cake recipe, it is on randomsweets.com now. I made it yesterday, and although I messed up the frosting, the cake and the frosting are delicious. But instead of just drizzling the frosting over the cake and then walking away, I tried spreading it and it just made a mess. So you can see a picture of it on my website, but the recipe is delicious. Thank you for listening today and being part of this community. And if you already subscribed to Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens, I'm so happy that you are here. Stay tuned for next week's episode with Kristen and Anna Raykamp. And coming soon is an episode with the founder of Nordic Waffles, Stina Osland, and the company's CEO, Jeremy Ely. We recorded it yesterday, and when we were done, I could not stop smiling. So I'll be back next week. Sweet wishes.